Okay, so I'll end by talking just a little bit about resilience and sort of preparing for either a changing climate or vulnerabilities from non-climate related issues like earthquakes or terrorism or even space weather, coronal discharges from the sun that can create electrical interference. This kind of woke up the Northeast, Hurricane Sandy, and there's now a lot of talk about resilience in my neck of the woods. This was a year earlier in Vermont where we had 10 inches of rainfall in a very short period of time, and it washed out a lot of highways, hundreds of miles of highway around the state. This is a big excavator, by the way, this little orange thing. A lot of problems, took out several hundred bridges, they're still fixing some of those. And that's because we've seen over the last 50 years an increase in intense storms. Up in the Northeast, we've seen a 67% increase in the last 50 years. It's about a 20% increase in intense storms in the Southeast. And even in places where there's less rain overall, in the West where there's a lot of drought, storms tend to be coming in higher, more intense dollops of rain. So they're having to deal with runoff. This was downtown Brattleboro, Vermont, where our office is located. The stream here jumped the bank, and this is Flat Street along these, totally covered with water. And I'll just tell you a quick story about a building that was just off to the right in that last image, this youth theater, New England Youth Theater, that was built a few years earlier. When they were building it, even though it was above the FEMA flood elevation level, met all the requirements, they said, well, let's just plan for the unexpected. And they installed what are called flood barriers in the entryway systems. It's an aluminum track into which these aluminum panels can be placed. And the morning before Hurricane Irene hit, they deployed these, I think, 20-inch flood barriers. And again, even though they were well above the flood elevation, the defined FEMA flood elevation, they did that before leaving. The water came up to within 1.5 inches of the top of those, and it basically saved the building. It would have been dramatic damage for a pretty new building. We lost a lot of culverts, and when they were replaced, we put in larger diameter culverts or multiple culverts to spread the flooding. We can look at building materials that you can get wet and then can dry out. So things like concrete floors. We have a polished concrete floor that we're standing on here, can create a nice finish. Even in homes, it's increasingly used. We can use, instead of standard drywall products, there's some fiberglass faced products that are much more resistant to water. We should look at wind, designed for wind. And this is the FEMA map on, the red is tornado vulnerability. This checked area on coastal areas is hurricane vulnerability. So designing to high wind requires products like hurricane tie-down straps and products made by, there are a number of companies that make these to reinforce the structures in residential and commercial construction. We're also seeing in the tornado belt of the country increasing installation of these safe rooms or storm rooms. And there's never been a recorded fatality of someone in one of these safe rooms during even the worst tornadoes. Designed for higher temperatures. This really is looking at what's ahead with climate change. The assumptions we've used in the past for designing the size of air conditioning systems, that may need to change a little bit as the temperatures rise. And then walkability, we found with Hurricane Sandy, there were a lot of areas that lost gasoline. People couldn't fill up their cars. So the solution to that is what you see in Serenbe, an ability for people to walk around, to get to a corner store or access what they need on foot or by bicycle. And here's Serenbe. This great compact development, sort of a practice of new urbanism or neo-traditional development, putting buildings back on the street level, which is just wonderful to see. This is where they've taken bicycle access to a new level. This is Copenhagen. I was over there a few years ago. And interestingly, they've got a row of parked cars here that separate the bicycle lane from the traveled car lane. And if anything we can do to reduce the amount of driving needed helps keep the broader environment a lot cleaner. And then part of resilience is designing for power interruptions. And in our part of the world, we have to worry about things like ice storms. We don't have to worry about that as much in this area, but there are other concerns that could cause power outages. Even drought. This was a map that CNN produced when, in 2007, there were 23 nuclear power plants that were very close to having to shut down because of lack of cooling water. 89% of our power generation in this country is thermoelectric power plants where we have to generate steam and then cool down that steam, so they require cooling water. So a long-term drought can actually turn into a power outage regionally. And the strategies for achieving this resilience, or sometimes called passive survivability, is a really robust building envelope that we talked about. Finally, I'll just close mentioning the concept of food security and the idea of integrating food production into the built environment. And one of the great things about Serenbe is the proximity of the farming community here, where there's food that's grown right locally. And there are other places that's being done. This is City Farm in Chicago. We see it in a lot of urban areas, particularly with a lot of immigrant populations and unemployment. This is Holyoke, Massachusetts, where there's 40% unemployment in parts of the city. But there are these vibrant community gardens where people are growing much of their food. And there's some innovative ways to do that with hydroponics, and a new practice, or fairly new, of combining aquaculture with hydroponics. Aquaculture is raising fish, and the waste from the fish can be used to fertilize the hydroponics. So they refer to that as aquaponics, where you marry those two technologies. And with that, that's it. A few resources that BuildingGreen has. The BuildingGreen.com is primarily a resource for architects and builders, but there's lots of information that can be accessed for free on it. It's a subscription-based resource that supports the company. We don't carry advertising, which, when we review products, keeps us honest and not slanted toward products that are where advertising supports that. And I think that's the last slide. So thank you very much for your attention.